I didn't get the countdown, Tony. You just went silent. I know, I see it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Panel to Play Live featuring Ms. Marvel and Hulkbuster. I'm Will Schick, Director of Product Development. With me is Marco. What do you do, Marco?
I am the Sculpting Manager here at Atomic Mass Games.
And then remotely, via the other office, we have Will Pagani, our Development Manager now. He's Mr. Manager. And Sarah joined us all the way across the country in New York.
Hello.
Our Associate Game Developer. How is everyone?
Alive.
This is day one of Mini Extravaganza. You gotta be more than alive. That's the
true.
answer for day 3 during the after party.
Oh.
Is double alive an option?
Double live is definitely an option.
Advanced alive?
So today we're here to talk about the process of how we make Marvel Crisis Pro characters. And we're going to be using Ms. Marvel and Hulkbuster, whose miniatures were shown a little while ago by BK as kind of our test cases. If you read the articles for Panel to Play Online, you'll kind of understand. In general, we're going to be talking about process, we're going to be talking about the thoughts and the development, the testing, and we're also going to be talking about the sculpting challenges and how these characters came into being, not just in rules, but also in physical reality. So that said, I'll kick things off, and we're going to talk a little bit about the general process. So the first thing that we do is we have to pick the characters themselves. The way in which we pick is kind of varied. A lot of the times we will pick things based on conversations with our great partners at Marvel. We'll also look to our expectations and our desires to expand the game. So do we want to introduce a new affiliation? Do we want to revisit an affiliation? What characters do we personally really love and want to see brought into the game? What characters are beloved by a wide variety of people and we haven't yet brought into the game? There's a whole slew of different criteria based on how we pick characters. And then once we have that, so for example, we always knew we wanted to do Hulkbuster. It was really important to us to do not only an amazingly awesome giant Iron Man suit, he's also one of those characters that just allows us to explore Tony Stark, who is a very popular character in mass media Marvel and just in general nowadays, in a brand new way that would be really exciting to bring another big threat character to the Avengers. With Ms. Marvel, we had a chance to explore a character that exploded in popularity when she was introduced in the comics. She's very beloved by avid readers of modern Marvel comics. And of course, she's been picking up a lot of steam in other Marvel media, between video game appearances and new show appearances and stuff like that. So we kind of got to have our cake and eat it too when it came to Ms. Marvel, of touching on a comic book character that many of us had read and very much enjoyed the runs of, and then also tap into kind of like one of the next big stars that was coming out in all of this different media as well. Once we have those characters kind of selected and we've talked with Marvel about our plans, we then go through and we build a character concept. And this is really where Marco steps in with his team and becomes very involved with myself, Dallas, and we begin talking about, okay, what is the character's look going to be? We have to identify costume parts. We're looking at, are we going to do a classic interpretation? Are we looking at modern? Some characters have a long comic history of what they look like, Hulkbuster being a specific one. We went with a more modern and updated interpretation of the Hulkbuster suit. Those who know about its original appearance and the way that it looked during World War Hulk know that that Hulkbuster suit is radically different in terms of style and design than the more modern one that we see in Immortal Hulk and, of course, in other Marvel media. So we decided to go with that one because we felt it was going to make the best miniature and it was also going to be the most recognizable. And then from there, we began diving into the specific concepting for pose and everything else that we want to do. And I think Marco can really start to talk about that process and the considerations that we have to make when we're looking at posing characters.
Yeah, because when we want to translate what you guys pick into 3D, we have to take into account the engineering aspects of making these miniatures into hard plastic. And one of the challenges with Ms. Marvel is that we wanted to really push a one-piece miniature, and to do that, we had to have a simple pose. And we kind of avoid simple poses like Miss Marvel right now because once you break a plane, you have to part it into more pieces. But this was a good chance to pick a pose that allowed to showcase the character's confidence, positive attitude, and really pay homage to the original artist who wanted to convey Captain Marvel's personality onto Kamala Khan's Miss Marvel. Mm-hmm. And so this was a way that we can have our cake and eat it too, give you a one-piece miniature that will give the personality as well as showcase her abilities in the enlarged form and show her cool stretching abilities as well as a good gesture of a positive nature of confidence of punching up in the sky. And really, like, we really wanted to push past the pose and make sure that the character was emulated in the miniature form.
You mentioned planes. Can you really quick, for those who might not have seen yours and Dallas's previous mini extravaganza stream or haven't heard Dallas or I talk a little bit in our layman understanding of all of the challenges engineering faces, kind of what you mean by that? Like, why do the planes matter, and how does parting really quickly, because this could be a whole 90 minutes, affect everything?
I mean, I could go on for days. So to simplify it for the sake of this stream, in hard plastic, we use metal molds, and which is not like resin, in which you have a silicone or a flexible mold where you can have what is called undercut, in which a miniature can be pulled out of the mold easily. A metal mold has to slot out. A metal mold cannot flex at all, so there has to be zero draft, which means any sort of hooking, any detail cannot exist on whatever you're laying up on a mold. So for Ms. Marvel, she's going to be laying up exactly how you see her in a mold, just kind of pressed down like that. And so whenever you break the plane, which is how she is in her pose, like if you wanted to twist her torso, now she's breaking up the plane. Now she's in two planes. Her elbows are going one direction and her legs are going in another direction. So as soon as you do that, you're going to have to part the model and make sure that it can be drafted and casted in a metal mold.
And specifically, you're talking about the digital version of the model that is the sculpt later that goes in and gets made. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So let's jump from here, which is the single piece Ms. Marvel, and show the big Ms. Marvel, the embiggened version, and then talk a little bit about how, because we can see the plane difference. So just walk us through really quick how this can't be a single piece miniature.
Absolutely. So it goes down to even like small details like fingers and things like that you're going to have to think how it's going to sit in a mold and sculpt it accordingly, so that you don't lose too much detail, but it's also not a pain to put together. And over the course, we've learned a lot of lessons, and this was a good way to really push its limits, especially after learning from the Ant-Man and Wasp pack, and making sure that those small parts can be whole. And so in this case, for the large version, we definitely wanted to, again, showcase the character, but also allow us to break those planes when necessary. And this was a perfect opportunity to have, like I said, have our cake and eat it too. So we can now lay her up differently and still have a good miniature that will look good on the table 360 degrees.
And then, of course, the one that breaks all the planes, because he's as large as a tank, is Hulkbuster. So we can throw that render up. I know I'm bringing up some some trauma here. But so not only did we have to figure out the planes, the parting, all of that, you have hard lines, you have a lot of different segments that are going together, which of course go into those undercuts you were talking about. Talk about balance, because I know one of the things that you guys are really good at in the engineering system is taking Dallas's crazy pose drawings that are just over the top work on the page and then making them work on the table?
I mean, really, it's an instinct that you develop on the job. It's like to be able to see a pose that you guys come up with, and then like, okay, I'm gonna part it this way, but also like, if I sculpt it in this way, I don't have to part it. And so, but in this case, for the Hulkbuster, and for large figures in general, we really want to showcase the detail and the complexity of Tony Stark's designs, right? This is a suit that carries another suit. So we really wanted to showcase that this is a very complex device, a suit that's going to house something. So we had to showcase those details that are exhibited in the modern design. And so even if that meant parting in different areas, retaining that detail, I think was going to go a longer way than trying to simplify parts that wasn't going to give the suit justice.
Because as you always point out to us, whatever's on the side of that mold press is just going to be blank.
It's going to be blank.
Right.
Yeah.
So
whatever follows that mold line is just going to be completely blank and just stretched.
Right. So if you ever want to see like where the mold connects, just spin the miniature around and find the place where there's no detail.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's where they sacrifice.
Or you'll find like a piece of cloth that's stretched all the way back to the leg and stuff.
Yeah.
Like that's how it pulls out of the mold. That's the only way without having to cutting it into like a bunch of pieces.
So once we have the pose figured out, we've gone through engineering to make sure that what we're looking at is not crazy, and we have a plan. We then create a concept doc, and we move into doing rules design. And that pretty much starts with myself and maybe a couple others, depending on whose favorite character is. We always like to involve people who have a high stake into the character themselves, into the initial design. And what we do is we write basically the general rules. So these are not final developed rules that make perfect sense or a climate for like the timing charts and things like that. It's basically things like Ms. Marvel transforms, cost 3, she goes to big size. In her big size, she does X, and then she transforms back. Once that concept is done, it effectively is playable in most forms from a generalized understanding, in a rules as intended kind of way, to use the community kind of speak for that stuff. But then it gets handed over to the developers, Pagani and Sarah, and we begin talking about how do we make these rules as intended, actually rules that work. And this is where we have some of our best conversations in the office, where almost every time initially Pagani looks at me with his raised eyebrow and says, we can't do this. And I say, I guarantee you can, because we did this, and this is basically that, but a little twisted. And he scrunches up his face, and Sarah comes in and saves the day. So Pagani and Sarah, why don't you tell us a bit about that process?
A lot of screaming, apparently.
A lot of screaming. Oh, you know, you're right down the hall.
Screaming is the best part. Screaming is actually critical to the development process.
Oh, yes, for sure. If you're not excited and yelling about it, like, why are we here? Especially at this point in the process, right? Because this is really when all the crazy stuff happens. This is when we're like Hulkbuster specifically. I remember we were talking about the rules for the character, and we were like, we're going to do this kind of stuff and this kind of stuff. Obviously, he's going to be Hulk-like because he's supposed to fight Hulk. I guess we're getting ahead of ourselves here before we show the cards, but Hulkbuster doesn't have an injured side. And we were like, well, can we do anything with that? Can we play with that kind of thing? And Chick was like, what if there was a little Iron Man inside the big Iron Man? And I was like, you're insane. Can we do that? Could be transform. It doesn't really work like transform. And then we just kind of like start iterating, right? And that's how a lot of these things sort of come down as a discussion, right? Chick will show up with this document, and then Sarah and I will be like, well, we could do this, we could do that, we could do this, and piece together how we're going to get this document into actual rules text and how it's going to actually function. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sarah, you got any takes on that?
Takes? I mean, I could make up some takes. No, but yeah, it's an interesting process, like you said, to take the intent of the thing, the rules as intended, and see how we can best fit that into our existing game, and make sure that we're carrying through the awesomeness of tiny Iron Man inside of big Iron Man, while also making sure that people can read that rule and understand how they're supposed to get that awesomeness to happen in game. That's why I like being a developer. It's really cool. I have a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah, one of the like we always talk about in these panels how I'm always like, Schick, we can't do that, and then it always works out that we can. But it's a lot of our job at this stage, right, is to make sure that things don't get too crazy or too complex for the game. So one of the things that we always try and do is find ways to use old mechanics or different mechanics to sort of create different feelings where players will be familiar with them. So when you see what happens with Hulkbuster and Iron Man, it's gonna be kind of like Transform, but not entirely like Transform.
And I
think
Jack. That's one of like the big things from the dev and design perspective that we've always had is it's a sandbox, but there's still edges of the box, and expanding the box is something that you do very rarely and with a lot of thought. So a lot of the times I'm very confident when I come to Pagani with ideas because I'm like, well, we already did this, and I'm literally just changing a couple of things here, the way in which the system works or things like that. So that really leads to things that allow us a lot of confidence going into testing, which is the part that Sarah has the most impact on.
Yeah, testing is a really exciting phase, obviously, because first we start with internal testing always, which is that me and the other developers, anybody who's around that you can grab in the office, make sure that it's going to play like we said as intended. Before we ever let our play testers touch it. Just, little bit of a sanity check there. And then comes the really exciting part where we do let the play testers see it and enter into the hot takes phase, as Pagani likes to call it.
The best phase.
Which is, like you said, the screaming phase. It's critical. The second screaming phase begins. Screaming 2. Where,
I think we'll get Screaming 3 here in a little bit.
Spoilers, Pagani. Spoilers, Pagani. Screaming 2 begins with showing the playtesters what we have made. And then they start screaming. And by screaming, I mean giving us their immediate thoughts and feedback and impressions, which are very valuable as far as knowing whether this card is going to be perceived the way we want it to be. And then they actually start playing it, and then we find out whether it's going to be played the way we want it to be, in addition to being perceived. And then we get to start iterating, and that process goes back and forth.
Mm-hmm. And eventually, after a lot of iteration, we wind up at a lock, at which point we're happy with the character, we're really good on the sculpt. Marco's team has engineered it, we've turned it over. Our great partners at Marvel, through the licensing process, approve everything and say this looks great, or make these small changes here. There's also a whole art step, which we don't have a Josh Colon here to talk about, but as the art director, he's going to be on a couple of the other panels. We do go through a whole process where, as Marco and his team are working on sculpts, Josh is working with our great artist stable to create art for the characters and all of that. And these processes kind of happen independently sometimes based on timelines, because one of the things that Marco can tell you is, how long are your timelines, Marco?
Very long. Very long, Jake. They don't always line up because of just the sheer amount of time that it takes to produce these miniatures.
Yeah. Because, walk us through kind of, so the development portion, writing the rules, going through the testing and stuff, that typically happens about 6 to 8 months after you've started your whole process?
It's mainly a lot of back and forth with our production houses and making sure that the integrity of the sculpt is still there while correcting any mistakes. And it's a very long planning process that, even though we get good feedback from community or internally, it's still going to trickle in slowly because of such long production times. But sometimes we do have that magical rare time that we do get to coincide with art, in which then we can feed back and forth and say they need a file to help reference the art and influence it. Then we can go back and forth with that, and that's if our timelines coincide with that.
So I think now is the time to get to what a lot of people have been waiting for, and that's specifically discussing these characters and their cards and everything about them. So let's start with Hulkbuster. Why not? That's what's on our list here to start with. So Hulkbuster was one of those ones, like I mentioned before, he was always on the list even when we started development of the game that we knew we were going to get to. It was too iconic of a Tony Stark moment not to cover. And again, I think it's something that's really fun because we talk a lot about how we want to hit these characters at different points in their timeline to have different abilities and showcase different states of their lifespan over the Marvel Comics universe. Hulkbuster is one of those where it's just like, this is clearly different in so many important ways that you get to make this entirely robust and cool character. And also it was really fun because, Hulk was kind of the Avengers' first big, and the game's first big Threat 6, monster of a character who got to bully things around a lot. And we got to go back and do another version of that big tank, bruiser character in Hulkbuster. It also gave us an opportunity to go back to Iron Man and view him through the leadership role for the Avengers, which was also really exciting and fun to do. So the first biggest thing that we had to tackle when we said we wanted to do Hulkbuster was determining the size. And I know, Marco, there were some conversations about how we applied lessons from things like Doctor Strange, Dormammu, and Magneto. So you want to kind of walk us through really quick what were some of the applied lessons from the past that when we said, okay, let's do this Hulkbuster, let's do him in this pose, that made you go, okay, we can do this?
Well, mainly, first of all, it's hard plastic. So weight was not too much of a concern. It's still a little bit of a concern, but compared to other materials, resin, metal, etc., weight is, we don't have to worry about the miniature toppling over when you're painting or playing. But the size, we really wanted, like you said, to have that big threat character that it's going to be intimidating but look really cool on the table as well and be iconic when you see it from afar. But also still in line with what else we have in our past miniatures. So with Hulk, being sure that it's still relative to around that size while not eclipsing anything we've done in the past. But at the same time improving on certain aspects of it, like the posing and all that stuff. In this case, the concern was that we wanted him to be launching. We really wanted Hulkbuster to be shown that this is a machine that flies too, and so we have it jumping while also being boosted up into the air by its feet blasters. But the problem was would that be too high? Would that be too tall? Would people even be able to put it on their shelf? And so we played around with it back and forth. We printed it so many times. And there was a lot of back and forth of this is too big, this is too small, and we always want to go big.
And we always, that's the answer, right? Go big or go home.
I don't know, right? Especially with Dormammu and everything, it's so tempting. But at the end of the day, as Dallas always likes to point out, and we always try to keep in mind, is that our whole miniature line is an art piece, a canvas itself, and we have to make sure that it all fits perfectly and it all works well together and it all looks visually in line with each other.
And I think one of the cool things that I know you and the sculptors and the engineers had fun with, Evan specifically, is that we actually got to design our own interior suit for the Hulkbuster, because that doesn't exist. There's no comic reference of what he looks like inside of it. And because we wanted this to be a very specific mark of Hulkbuster and Iron Man combo,
absolutely,
you guys got to kind of dive in and create something that was an amalgam of different things to create a unique Hulkbuster suit, right?
Yeah, and bridge that, what I was talking about of how having too much detail and still paying homage to the old core set Iron Man, to find that in between where we want to showcase the design of Tony Stark, but at the same time be something new and fresh, and also iterate on what we did in the core box, because the core box Iron Man has a strong pose and a very narrow scope of angles. But it was important to us that we make sure that the silhouette and the miniature looked good 360 degrees in all angles.
And also important, I like the distinction between those two, because we very intentionally, based on the rules that we're going to look at and talk about here in a second, made the interior Iron Man Hulkbuster really light, right? It is the ejection suit. It's not a full-fledged Iron Man suit. He expects to have the Hulkbuster on. And so once he pops out in his oh crap moment, he becomes pretty fragile, and he has to deal with losing the Hulkbuster suit. One of my favorite details that got added was the idea of putting all the little glowy nodes on. Like that's how he connects to the larger suit, kind of like, big robot style. So there was I think there's just a lot of great design work that you and the team did in terms of like making a really unique atomic mass take on Hulkbuster in general on the interior. So I think we're probably ready to like almost throw up the cards.
Almost.
I'm looking at our thing here. Pagani already mentioned this once, but one of the big things as I was designing Hulkbuster's like initial rules and talking to people was that because he has Hulk in the title, as Pagani mentioned, all Hulks don't have an injured side. And so we wanted to maintain that in the Hulkbuster. We wanted to make sure that Hulkbuster didn't have an injured side. But then the idea came about, well, what if he pops out? What if he ejects? Which leads back to the conversation we just had. And that became like the whole thing. So let's go ahead and throw the card up, Tony, and we can take a look at this beefy boy. So you'll see, of course, he does have a new leadership. It's Hulkbusters. We wanted to kind of represent, this is Iron Man leading the charge against Hulks or other big, huge threats. And this leadership went through a couple of changes. The one that wound up on the card is not the one that it started at, and Pagani and Sarah can probably talk a little bit about why that changed through actual testing, and we can just kind of view the process in that way.
Yeah, so the Hulkbuster's the third Avengers leadership that's being released, right? So as we go through into these larger affiliations with more and more and more leaderships, they need to get more and more niche in what they are, essentially, to sort of carve out their spot inside of the affiliation. And because of how the core rules work, if you deploy multiple leaders, you can pick which leadership to use after you deploy. So you kind of know what your opponent's going to play. So this leadership was specifically... There's cards over there. This leadership is specifically like this, not because we expect someone to use it every game, but because like when this is relevant, it's going to be very relevant. Whereas more like Steve Rogers or Sam Wilson's leaderships, you can sort of build around those concepts. I don't think you can really build around the Hulkbuster leadership. But when you do get into a situation when you're like, I gotta beat that Hulk, this could be a good one to take. So that's sort of the philosophy behind this leadership. And it started out as a lot of different things. This one has to do with collision damage, which is very powerful. But we had other things like when you're fighting things that are bigger than you, size-wise, you get benefits. When bigger things are fighting you, you get benefits. So there were a lot of different takes on where we could go with a leadership for Hulkbuster to sort of show, like, this is the Avengers squad specifically fighting big stuff, Hulks, Dormammus, other things. So that was sort of the basic thought process behind the leadership. And this came out a lot in playtest. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Check how many leaderships do we go through? Like 5?
It was so the very first one that we wrote was if you're attacking something that's bigger than you, you get a certain number of rerolls. Yeah. And that turned out in testing to be a little clunky, and it wasn't always applicable, and people didn't like it as much. So we decided to change the leadership. And we did wind up on this. And one of the things that I think I really liked to kind of go back to those conversations we had was, the idea is you take Hulkbuster and you take Captain America. And because you get to choose your leadership after you see your opponent's squad, the Hulkbuster has value beyond the leadership. The leadership is really useful if the team composition has a lot of throws. But he also gains a lot of benefit under Steve's leadership, obviously. Like you see, he's got 3 powers that cost power, and 2 of them he can utilize that leadership on. So I really liked the idea that we came up with this parallel leadership where you kind of want both on the table, and then it gives you a lot of flexibility to decide based on your opponent's squad construction what is going to be best for you, and you don't necessarily feel penalized if you take one over the other because of that flexibility in terms of stuff. And I thought that was a really compelling argument that came about during testing and one of the discussions that we had as well.
I think if we're moving on from leadership just onto cool stuff on the card, I think my favorite thing on this card is Meteor Punch, because you don't gain power from the damage that it deals, and that's one of the main ways that Hulk-style characters gain power, is from that damage. So to me, that's a really cool, like, oh, this is designed to fight that type of enemy. So I really love that specific thing.
Yeah, the Hulkbuster is a great example of writing rules that specifically interact with other characters to create those cinematic moments that the game is built around. That if you play this with your Hulks, you're gonna get that cool Hulkbuster feel. They're gonna go bash on each other, and it's gonna be awesome. And they have specific counters and things built right into them that bring that out.
Yeah, and another thing that came up in testing, which people might have caught, is that he has a really unique power generation mechanic on his, what the community kind of calls, builder. And this also came out of testing. And it was it's an interesting discussion because it comes back to the idea of, like, what do high threat characters need in order to be worth their threat, in order to be a viable play experience and feel like the powerful characters that they are. And, you know, when you look at a 5-threat character or a 6-threat character especially, you often see that they generate power in unique ways. And so after the attack resolves, if the attack doesn't deal damage, he generates 1, was one of those things that came up from testing that allows Hulkbuster to do all the things he wants to do, whether he reliably, even with the unreliability of that, gain power equal to damage dealt. Although with a strength 6 energy attack with his heavy repulsor blast, it's not very often that he's not doing something and building power. But that was yet another kind of one of those iteration things where that rule wasn't there. In fact, it never even existed in the game. And yet, through testing and discussions, we were able to come up with an idea that, well, we have things that just generate 1 power afterwards. What if this thing just had an extra clause that said, if it doesn't deal damage, you get that 1 power? And
I see Chad is talking a little bit about the second part of the Hulkbuster's leadership.
Yeah, I think we're probably ready to reveal that. So let's blow up Hulkbuster and let's pop out little ejector suit Iron Man.
So that clause is there because this version of Iron Man is obviously a different character, right? It's no longer Hulkbuster. So that clause has to be there so that when you destroy Hulkbuster and Iron Man comes out, you still have a leadership. Then as you can see here, it also needs to be there on Hulkbuster because if Iron Man's backup plan works out, you get a Hulkbuster back.
Yeah, so this was the moment. This was one of my moments that I'll remember for the rest of my life because I was sitting there working on the design document, and I was like, "What if he could bring Hulkbuster back?" And I wrote the rule, and then I got so excited I yelled for Josh to come into my office. But I always make it sound like Josh is in trouble because I like just messing with him because Josh and I go way back. And he comes in, he's like, "What, chick?" And I'm like, "Come here and look at this." And Josh looked at it, and then he started doing his Josh, and he was like, "What? What?" And he's throwing up his hands, and he's not doing things. Everyone who's been around Josh, like Marco knows.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of this.
Yeah, there's a lot, and he's like, "What are you doing?"
He can't even find the words.
Can this even work? And he does his Josh thing, and at that point, you've hit something.
We love you, Josh.
So then we bring in everybody, and I remember this specifically because it was right before everything closed down for COVID. So it was one of the last times that we were all in the office together where we could do this and look at it live. And so everybody comes in, and of course I bring in Pagani last because I'm like, if anybody's going to be the rain cloud on this parade, it's going to be Pagani. And he comes in and he's just like, "You're a crazy man, but I love it." And that's the highest compliment you can get from a Pagani. And so from there we knew it was going to go. Now obviously 10 power is a huge amount, and I think this comes back to one of the things we've talked about other panels and stuff. But a lot of the times when you design rules, sometimes you design them with the intent that they're going to be rare, that the instances of them are going to be epically legendary. And so while it's possible to pull off always have a backup, it's going to be one of those moments that you'll remember forever. You're like, he popped out, I managed to get to 10 power without him getting dusted first, and I got Hulkbuster back, and it was amazing. And Pagani and Sarah can talk a little bit about how that really powerful effect and that really flavorful effect was balanced within the testing of it. But these are things like Fearful Symmetry, which we talked about in the Spider-Man panel. And we showed off those cards and stuff. Fearful Symmetry is not a great card, but it is an amazing card because it builds the narrative, it tells the story, and if you pull it off, you're a legend. You get to tell that story for the rest of your life. I did Fearful Symmetry. My Kraven became Spider-Man. and it ties back to the comics and all this stuff. And it felt so Tony Stark that he would have extra parts in his space satellite to bring down if he could pull it off, and you could bring back Hulkbuster. That it had to be a thing that was in the game purely for the chase in some cases as well.
I think it only happened once internally in playtest, and I think once in external playtest as well. Because this is a new character, he no longer has the power that he had when he was Hulkbuster, so he starts at 0. And as you can see, Rapid Repulsor Blast doesn't make a bunch of power, so it's not exactly easy to get back to 10. But if you do, you get back Hulkbuster, which is incredible. And we played around a lot with this, right? Like, is it 8 power? Is it 10 power? How does Iron Man make power? Power?
Pow.
Pow. He shoots lasers, that's how. So there are all sorts of things that went into how to balance this. When does it happen? We had like a version of it where it was a reactive power at the end of the round. So if Iron Man did got punched and gained power from the damage, he could then use it, even if it wasn't his activation. But we ended up with an active superpower, which makes it a little harder to pull off because you have to have the power during your activation. It's 10, which is obviously the most in the game. So that's kind of where it ended up.
And he doesn't have a lot of stamina, so he can't rely on getting knocked around to get the power. And then, speaking of getting knocked around, you're tempted just a little bit with that new plan to spend some of it before you get to 10. So it is really tricky to pull off, but you can. You definitely can. And when you do, it is the coolest thing ever. Yeah,
I mean, we play tested it in a bunch of different affiliations too, like Inhumans giving him power, A-Force even, like all sorts of these, Red Skull, Cabal, like we tried it all, and it's rare, but man, it's great.
When it does happen, it is incredible.
It's great.
So there is, I think, one tactic card that we want to show off with Hulkbuster, and this is one of those moments where oftentimes when we get to go back to characters or revisit characters, we have the opportunity to add cool effects to the original characters or to kind of open up options and opportunities for characters that came before if we feel like it thematically makes sense and we want to do it. I mentioned that this version of the Hulkbuster was pulled not only from the modern media, some of the movies and stuff, but also specifically from the Immortal Hulk run. And that whole scene where the Avengers confront Immortal Hulk and they're trying to bring him in, because they're not sure what his intentions are and they've been connived into stopping their one-time ally. There's a moment where Tony Stark, in a bit of desperation to stop Immortal Hulk, activates the Helios laser. And I had just come off of reading this run, and I was like, we have to do this as a team tactic. It's too awesome not to. And Pagani's like, what does it do? And I'm like, well, it blows up the world. It glasses an entire city. And he's like, what does that mean? And I was like, it's got to be strength 1 billion. I mean, you can't do that. So we sat down and we talked about what does the Helios laser do. And here's the card. And Sarah can talk a bit about what the card does and how cool it is.
All right, there. It looks like it managed to get up. So giving everybody a second to read, it is obviously an attack, like Schick mentioned, but it's not strength 1 billion. So sorry for anybody who was hoping. It is, however, strength a lot, depending on how much power your team has stored up for it, which is interesting because your Iron Man is over there trying to build his power to get his Hulk suit back. So temptations everywhere. But this is really interesting, again, to play off of the fact that this Hulkbuster could be a leader for the team. So the team together spends power to activate the bombardment. And if Pagani wants to talk a little bit more about that.
Oh, yeah. So when this card was originally designed, I think it was strength 14 or something, or 10. I don't know. Schick went crazy.
It was 10. It was 10. It cost 6 and was a strength 10. It was fine.
I remember it broke the layout template because the numbers didn't fit, so we had to change it. That's what I remember. But yeah, so we kind of had this idea that's if you can just dump any number of power into this card, right? So your entire team can pay power, and then for all the power added, that adds dice to the attack. So sure, it starts at 5. I think the biggest one I've ever seen was 22 shooting a Dormammu. It didn't go well for Dormammu. But yeah, and this one, this card also changed a lot, as I guess is the theme of Hulkbuster here. We had things like it would do a bunch of conditions or do a whole ton of area damage, right? Because as Schick said, it glassed a whole city in the comics. I don't think we can really do that in the game, or it just won't be very much fun. So we went through a lot of different iterations on this one. At one point, it was global. You could pick anybody on the table. Didn't require line of sight because it's a satellite shooting down, right? We didn't end up with that stuff for balance concerns. But yeah, I really like this idea that Iron Man has this gadget floating above the planet and can utilize that. And I love that it's Tony Stark here for who has to play it instead of Hulkbuster or Iron Man, because that lets the core set Tony Stark use this card as well. And I guess you could Friday AI it, I guess, but you should just pay for the card more. I don't know. Yeah. So that was one of my favorite things, is it kind of gives us a little throwback to the core set Iron Man, where it's like, are you planning to go against a Hulk? Did you bring Iron Man? You could bring a Helios laser bombardment. So it was an interesting and fun way to sort of revisit the original core set Iron Man.
Yeah, and I think, like I mentioned before, right, there's a lot of times when we're working on things there are a lot of ways to bring relevance back to characters that have been released a long time ago, to teach old dogs new tricks in some ways, to offer new ways to look at characters and things like that, whether it's a leadership, an affiliation, a team tactic card. And it's one of the fun things about the game is that, everything always can have new life as we evolve and grow. And some of these seeds are planted, and some of them, like the Helios laser bombardment, come from just reading comics and being like, these are opportunities that we have as the storylines evolve, because these characters are always growing. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about working on this property and this project, is that, we don't know what's coming next all the time, but we know that when great things happen, we have methods to implement them into the game and to kind of continue to tell the story in our own version through Crisis Protocol. So the Helios laser bombardment is really fun. I don't know if we have the other card in his pack. It's
we do.
Do we? Do we? Okay.
We do.
So I'll let Sarah take this one as well.
Ooh. All right, let's give it a second to get up here. Fall back! I don't know. I always think a Crisis card is good if when you see it, you want to scream whatever it says. Like, that's how I like to play. Throw it on the table and yell. But aside from that, this is obviously, there's some lovely Iron Man art in the back there. I
actually think that's rescue.
It is rescue, yeah.
Look.
She's rescuing civilians. But it's an Iron Man suit, so it's Tony Stark engineered.
It's engineered by somebody using Stark tech.
Yeah.
That's what really matters. Did you steal things from the Starks? You're good. Yeah, so this is really great for little baby Iron Man when he's ejected. Sometimes you don't need to splash somebody with 1,000,000 power. Sometimes you need to get out of there. And I like cards that offer that sort of utility, that sometimes you just want to run away. Or run forward or whatever. But, not every card needs to be a Helios laser. Once you've spent all your power on the Helios laser, you're not going to do it again anyway. So there's a lot of utility to little baby Iron Man running away.
My favorite part about this card is that it happens before damage is dealt. So even if the attack is going to daze you or KO you, you can move away before you drop your tokens. And that to me is one of my favorite uses of this card.
Yeah. it definitely adds that extra level of like, and the art is kind of like that, because when you see the full art, you'll see Rescue is like protecting civilians who are running away behind her, and that was really, I think, the best play pattern we saw from the card was, okay, you're going to daze me, but I'm going to advance backward short, and I'm going to drop my token so far away that you can't get it anymore, even though you place it. There's some other fun plays with it, like you can run forward if you think you're going to get pushed away, and then you're like, okay, well, where are you going to push me now? You can try to like put yourself against terrain. It's not always a fallback. Sometimes falling back is falling forward, as we learned.
Falling sideways.
Falling
it
sideways.
does have to be away.
Sometimes
yeah,
the best
falling
defense
sideways.
is to advance.
Okay.
long as the
But
card has
yes, if you
flexibility,
do
right?
move out of
That's
line
right.
of sight or whatever, the attack still goes through.
Mhm.
Like this doesn't. It's not like Loki's trickster or anything.
Yep. All right, so I think that brings us to the close of Hulkbuster. So let's jump in to talk about one Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel. Kamala was definitely one, like I mentioned before. A lot of us in the office are avid comic readers. Many of us have a strong attachment to this character. I would definitely call her one of the most popular modern new characters in Marvel. When that run came out, I just remember everyone being like, you have to read this. It's incredible. The team behind it was amazing. The stories that it was telling were amazing. I think the character's positivity, she kind of takes that Spider-Man like mentality of like awe, wonder, positivity, and then she combines it with her own Kamala Khan-ness to make a character that is just a joy to read. And we wanted to make sure that we kind of like emphasize that, as Mark said in the sculpt. We wanted that energy, that youthful, like she's excited to be there, right? She's not like some of the characters that have been doing this forever. Like she idolized all of these heroes, and now she gets to be one. The Champions run and kind of the mentality within that run of what that group was trying to do to bring back the hero and superhero, all of that stuff really like informed us when it came down to how are we going to create this character? How do we want her to look? We wanted to add that teenage sass. And then, of course, we wanted to make sure that she played in a very unique and different way. And it started actually with, she wasn't a transforming character at the time. She was designed before transform mechanics were really made. I had an initial design for Kamala, which she used her superpowers to kind of reflect her stretchiness and her embiggening powers. But the idea was she would always start big. After working on Ant-Man and Wasp and seeing what Pagani was able to do with the transform rules, from taking them from like rules as intended to rules as written, we kind of looked back and we were like, we have to do Kamala as a transforming character. There's just no way we can't. But how do we make it different? How do we make it feel different? And we talked about this with Hood a little bit, but the goal is always to make the transforming characters feel unique. So Ant-Man and Wasp spend power to do it, and they can shift back and forth very freely. What could we do with Kamala to make her transform mechanic also unique, her embiggening kind of thing? And the genesis of this came kind of out of the idea that when she embiggens, especially in her, as she starts out as a hero, which is this kind of the reflection that we're taking here, is this is her at the start of her career in those initial storylines. She can't maintain her embiggened form for very long. She gets tired, so she has to be conservative about it. So we took that idea of, okay, well, you can transform at will, but you're going to transform back based on these certain conditions. And that was something that we went through a lot of revisions with through playtest. And it became like this thing where she became a very interesting character to balance based on how the transform mechanic worked and what benefits transform gave you versus what benefits being in the normal form gave you. And Pagani, I think, can definitely walk us through that, as can Sarah, in terms of how those things go. And in order to do that, I guess we better show the card.
I guess.
I mean, you could just talk about it. We could never show it.
I'm sure everyone would love that.
Yes. So we knew that we wanted. So to kind of go back a little bit on Ant-Man and Wasp, right? One of the things that happens with them when they transform is that they can't hold objective tokens anymore. And this was kind of to us like they're too big or something, or like a civilian can't turn into a tiny ant and run away that they're holding and stuff, was our justification for that. But we took that idea and applied it a little bit to Kamala Khan, where in her normal form, she's sort of this very controlling, board control, area control, pushes people, throws things character. And then when she embiggens, she's just ready to beat people up, basically. She's ready to fight. That's when she gets cornered and has to fight, essentially. So when she gets really big, she goes to strength 5 from strength 4. If you read morphogenetics, she gets to reroll her attack dice. But she can also kind of use that stretchiness and use that larger size to pick up tokens from farther away. So the normal version was sort of more of the secure objective playing one, whereas the embiggened version was the fighty extract objective token one. And I thought that was really interesting. That is definitely not how she started. However, this character and Hulkbuster both went through a lot of revisions. I remember in the original normal version, she didn't have the push, she didn't have the throw, and she had polymorph was originally on that side. So we ended up with this character that was just sort of like, well, why do I ever want to get big if all of the stuff that I do that's important to scenario play is on my normal form? So we had to balance that out a lot through playtest and through that kind of thing to see where the character really felt good and really was failing to deliver the idea of the character.
It's also important to note that, you know, unlike Ant-Man and Wasp or even Hood, who stay on the same base, she goes from a 35 to a 65. So you get the range 1 place, you get the bigger base, and you get to interact within range 2. Like, she can reach basically anywhere. It's pretty.
She's no Ant-Man, but she goes places for sure.
So there was all of that. One of the big things was balancing the high 5 attack to make it feel really potent and powerful, because you'll notice that obviously she doesn't get to stay in her big form. So you're kind of paying the embiggen cost to transform up to make a couple of big attacks for free, and then you'll transform back down. Or to grab an objective or anything like that. The other really cool thing about the way that transform mechanic works is that she can, with the place and the base different, we saw a lot of play where she would go really aggressive, grab a token, and then she would transform back at the end of the turn and either go out of line of sight or she'd go behind cover or to a more defensible position. So she can kind of play this really unique hit and run situation.
Yeah.
She's extremely versatile. She has a lot of different things in her kit that make her fit into a lot of places in your roster.
She's also very consistent with the attack die reroll and the defense die reroll from Inhumans, plus the morphogenetics rerolls. Like a strength 5 attack with 3 rerolls that's a legitimate attack. And you're paying 3 power to get the option of maybe doing it twice. And as Shik said, when you do that transform, that's almost a short advance, given the base size. So she gets in there.
Absolutely.
I think she's great adding into the Inhumans because she gives them another cheaper option that can really perform, basically. She's pretty defensive. She's pretty offensive.
And we
I like her a lot.
Talked a little bit about the sculpt already, especially the front when we're talking about planes and stuff. There's anything, Marco, that you wanted to discuss in terms of like, I mean, I know one story that maybe you could talk about, which was the difficulty of a sculptor doing her weird physiology.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't have joints.
She doesn't have joints. It really had to push the style. It was very difficult to make her not look so stiff and stoic or like wooden. That's the concern, is wooden like Pinocchio, because the limbs are not natural and because they have to enlarge in different ways that still look proportional to the miniature. So we really had to go back and forth and then clean up areas that needed to either be simplified or perhaps emphasized, and to really give the stretch, even if it meant pushing past those limits of what the human body can do. It's Ms. Marvel, like she could stretch. So we took those liberties to really push that gesture line that Pagani was doing, to like give it that curve, and whichever angle you turn her around, like you see how she's stretchy and big and like long, and how dynamic and those proportions can be.
And there's no real like sharp angles on her either. I remember
No.
like initially we got the sculpting and we're like, why does she have elbows?
It was very robotic, but,
Yeah.
you know, some cleanup and tweaking and back and forth where we really, again, like it's making sure that the character comes through the sculpt and then therefore onto the table.
So I think we have a couple of team tactic cards to talk about when it comes to Ms. Marvel herself. One of the big things is people who've read the comics, or as you get introduced to the characters, she took on the moniker of Ms. Marvel because one of her all-time idols was Captain Marvel, and Ms. Marvel before that, Carol Danvers. And this was a moment where we really wanted to emphasize those kind of relationships that Ms. Marvel has built throughout her initial comic runs and stuff like that. And again, much like Helios Laser Bombardment, it's always fun to go back to a legacy character or a character that's been around for a while and give them new options and tactics and opportunities, especially with kind of the new group of characters coming out. So Fan Club was one of my favorites that we came up with. And this is another card that when we sat down to create tactic cards, I think the pitch was, well, she does something with Captain Marvel. What does she do? I don't know. She does something. Like, they have to work together to do something. And then that gets left for the devs to come up with what that something is. And it's a bit of the reverse, like it's role reversal, because then they come up with their ideas, as Pagani and Sarah will talk about. And I get to say, no, I don't like that. You have to change it because it doesn't work within the story. And so we get to flip-flop our roles a little bit. But I'm really excited for this card. I'm a huge fan of Captain Marvel. Can't wait to add Ms. Marvel alongside of her. Go ahead and talk a little bit about this, my fellow devs.
Absolutely.
Sarah, you want to jump in? Or you want me to take it?
I'll jump in. So as you can see, if you've been reading the card while Schick was giving a beautiful intro, the way this card works is that it's really interesting to me because it's really plays off of that personality of idolizing Miss Marvel, that she waits for Miss Marvel to do one of her cool things that she can do and then does something to help that goes along with her. So obviously we have the Danvers special with her whole name in it. And that comes first. And it's very exciting for both of them, I'm sure. And, you know, for each of these things as we go down, they get to piggyback off of each other, which, like Schick says, gives you a reason to put them in a roster together. It makes things that Ms. Marvel mechanically was Captain Marvel mechanically was already doing more exciting because you get more bang for your buck each time you do them. And then gives you reason to keep the two of them together. Pagani, if you want to go into more of the specifics of how we develop these specific things, you can.
So this one was really fun because it was really like talking to Josh, who just loves Miss Marvel. It was like, yeah, she's just like a fangirl of Carol Danvers. So it was like, cool. How can we like embody like a fan club into the game? So it was like, oh, Captain Marvel does this cool thing. And Miss Marvel's like, yeah, I'm gonna do it too, and like go do her thing. So like, I don't know. I really like the flavor of this card where it's like a get him. I don't know. That's how it works out for me.
Well, and it opens up a lot of really interesting, I think, options for her because obviously the throw can be really powerful used out of activation because you're getting a double throw, which I think one of my favorite ones was when we watched Captain Marvel throw a character to Ms. Marvel who then threw them again, which was incredible.
I'd forgotten about that.
I don't know if it was effective, but it put that poor target like way out of the fight. Like it was just like yoink yoink, and you're like, oh well, I guess we're done here. So there's some really fun and I think like the devs were talking about, you know, Sarah and Pagani, getting to stack on top of those things is really cool. The outside of activation and bigoting can be really impactful. With the push away short, you can really set up some great plays there. And then if she's out of the fight and needs to get there, you can always advance medium towards the character. Out of activation movement is great, and medium is like forever when it comes to stuff like that. So
It's true. And I would like to point out there's no range on this, right? So, like, you
Yeah.
don't have to position on the table or anything. It's just anywhere you want to go.
you can always
be
see
a fan
Captain Marvel
from
do her
any
cool stuff.
distance.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. She's glowy, she's flying. You can fangirl over her from any distance.
Need that on a shirt.
So the other team up card that we wanted to do, and was a really big one for me, because I wanted to give a nod towards her role in the Champions. And as I mentioned, I know a lot of people are like, Champions when? They're definitely one of those teams that's become very iconic. This Ms. Marvel, this is not the time period. Like I mentioned, we were really looking at her initial involvement in the Marvel Universe, kind of those starting runs from that great creative team. We wanted to represent Ms. Marvel at the start of her career. And there's always opportunities, and we always love revisiting characters to bring things back in. It still felt really important to me due to the unique relationship that she has with one Miles Morales, and kind of their partnership throughout the comics and various ups and downs, and also being part of the Champions, that we have a nod and a team tactic card to that relationship and kind of reflect the start of what something great will grow from it. And that led us to A Better Tomorrow, which was the second one where I said, Ms. Marvel and Miles Morales do something cool, figure it out. And then I walked away. That was kind of the theme for all of the team tactic cards in Ms. Marvel's pack. So let's go ahead and bring up A Better Tomorrow, and we can discuss what that one does. Maybe. Do we have that one?
We should.
We have it.
Oh, okay.
It's here.
It's just.
I have it.
I'm glad you have it. It's not on our screen, so. Oh, there it is. It's up now. Great.
Beautiful.
Take it away.
So this one we had actually a lot of game balance concerns originally, because it was the idea behind this is like Miles throws Miss Marvel, who then embiggens midair and lands, or is it the other way?
No, I think it's that way.
Which way did we end up with this one?
I believe-
somebody threw somebody.
Well, Miles
Yeah.
is in the beginning on landing, so probably.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, this is like Miles throws Miss Marvel, and Miss Marvel grabs Miles after embiggening and pulls him forward. So we originally had this one. It was kind of a gamma launch situation where people were abusing it with different extracts and stuff. So that's kind of where it started. We had to iterate through it, but it's this like the two of them moving down the street to help the civilians at the end of the street and stuff like that. And these two characters always sort of throw each other or maneuver each other in different ways. And that's really what we wanted to show here. So you get the range 3 place on the embiggen instead of range 1. Miles then gets to hop up to Ms. Marvel. And that gave a lot of very early movement to the game. And really what it does in the game now in this iteration is it makes these characters very flexible about where they can be on the table, because you don't have to play this during your activation, so you can get a ton of movement for both characters. So
Yeah, I was sold when I walked in and you're like, okay, so the pitch is that Miles Morales takes normal Ms. Marvel and he like web swings her around and throws her forward, and then she embiggens and reaches back with her large hand and grabs Miles and then puts her next to like where she lands, and I was like, this seems brilliant. I love it. I can see it in my head. But I'll be honest, my Achilles heel when it comes to anything is like, does another character throw a character to make them do something cool? I'm in. Like, those are the best moments.
And there are a lot of them.
There are a lot of them. So
And
it's everything great.
speaking of being able to see it in your head, this is definitely a really kinetic card and a good chance to talk about how sometimes when Schick flips the script on us over here in dev and we come up with cards, we'll actually work pretty closely with the art department who will be drawing all the art for the cards and ask like, well, what cool moments do you guys love? What do you want to draw? And then we'll work to make sure that the rules match with them, which can also help with, I believe Marco mentioned, some people have different lead times. So sometimes they'll draw us something and we'll go, we can make that do something cool. And this is a really good example of many different departments coming together to make something that feels cohesive and brings out an important moment for the characters.
So that is, I think, everything that we have on Ms. Marvel, our newest Inhuman/Avenger. So we are at the end of our character stuff. Is there anything else that folks want to add or throw out before we wrap this one up and call our first official Mini Strava panel to a close?
I'm just excited.
You're
all this stuff.
Just excited to be here.
Well, no, I mean, like as always, I'm excited for the community to actually get their hands on miniatures and do what they do best, which is to extend the stories that we provide for them and expand on the art that we provide. And they do their own take, and it's especially with these kind of characters, and especially with Ms. Marvel and extension Carol Danvers, who have always inspired a confidence and positivity in their character. And it's especially during these times, it's a nice levity that we really need. And it just makes it all the more exciting for what's going to come. And as Daz always says on his streams, we work in the future, a year or two from now. So, like, if you think this stuff is really cool and exciting, it's always going to get better. And there's just...
Just wait.
Just wait.
Just wait. 2 years from now.
Yeah.
You're going to see some incredible stuff.
Well, as always, we're improving. This stuff is incredible, but this is... Just kidding.
It is really fun, though. Like, and the reason that I love doing these panels to play and doing them live and talking about the process, right? You know, it's not just about looking at the cards. It's about talking about how did we get here. And Mini Stravaganza is a fun time where I think we get to pull back the curtain and say, well, you know, we started here and we ended up here, and this is everything that went in. Like, these characters wouldn't exist without the core set. They wouldn't exist without things like Doctor Strange pushing. I mean, I still remember Baby Marco being like, there's no way we can do this. This is insane. And then you sitting there and working at your workstation and sculpting Doctor Strange and making it and coming up with that, and then moving on to Thanos. You know, that iterative building process of improving everything, learning, and going forward. It's no different in dev. You know, we started out with ideas of like how things work and what we could do, and then we challenged those things bit by bit by bit, and we continue to push forward with this shared vision that we all have. And I think, to me, that's great. So it's like, yeah, everything that's here now is amazing. It's the best work we've ever done until the next work we've ever done, right? And that's the goal. It's being satisfied, but never like content. And always wanting to move forward.
Because the reward is always when you see the community post and share their ideas, and it's so rewarding, and it's really exciting to see what people can do.
So I did see Schick. We never showed the injured side of Miss Marvel. Do you think we should do that, or should we just let them squirm?
Do we have the injured side of Ms. Marvel?
I believe we do, but we don't have to.
I mean, we could show it.
It's in the folder.
It's fine. Show the injured side of Ms. Marvel. Tony's got the thumbs up. It's here.
Oh.
Boom.
It's the same.
It's the same. Yeah, there you go. But it's a good one. Look at that cool art. Now she's coming at you, punching with the noodle fist. So it's all great.
Yeah.
Any last words from either Sarah or Pagani before we wrap this up? Anything you guys would like to say?
Yes, I think if you get off a crazy Helios laser bombardment, tag me on it in social media, because I want to hear that story. Every single one of those stories is pure gold.
All right. Sarah, you got to close us out. Words of wisdom.
All I have to say is that Baby Marco implies the existence of Hulkbuster Marco, and someday I expect to see it.
He'll get to that 10 power someday.
I'll grow up one
Someday.
day.
Someday.
All right, Sarah, take us out.
All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Tune in for the next streams because it's only going to keep getting better.